So if I was today to go walk into your average clothing store and buy a non-numerically sized coat, there's about a 30, 40, 50-ish% chance that I would have to size up to a double XL. A lot of today's XLs are just a bit too small for me. With that in mind, check out how this vintage Polo Ralph Lauren piece, size XL, fits. I give you the duffel coat. All right, I gotta shed some layers around, so I'm gonna overheat, but I wanted y'all to see how this would fit over a jacket. All right, so I don't have hardly any experience actually wearing a duffel coat. I've bought and sold a handful of them. Well, actually, I don't have that much experience wearing classic Ivy Prep inspired menswear in general. I bought and sold a lot of it, and I've worn it a little bit, but it's not like I've worn it to work for the past 20 years, but I'm trying because I really do like it, and I think it is the style that I will kind of age into. But I've had some viewers comment on this beauty that I use as a backdrop because it's beautiful and it fills out the frame really nice. And I figured, if I'm gonna have this thing on display, I better know a little bit about it. So I figured, let's explore the duffel coat. Now, some of you might be a little hesitant to buy a duffel coat with spring in full bloom, but if you're willing to delay the satisfaction of actually wearing it, you can score yourself a really good deal. Because a lot of sellers out there do not want to hold on to these over the summer after not moving them in the winter because they are a pretty big bulky garment, so you can probably get it at a pretty good discount. Plus, we've got spring cleaning going on, so you're gonna have part-time, just one-off eBay sellers or Poshmark or whatever have you, sellers finding grandpa's old duffel coat and throwing it on the internet at a price to sell. So, let's kick off this adventure, and first things first, let's talk about what makes a duffel coat a duffel coat. Put this bad boy on. All right. The classic British duffel coat is made up of really about 6 components, I would say. First, you have this dense, thick, woven, felted woolen fabric. Next, you have a very generous, oversized fit. Next, you have these really big front pockets. Next, you have a very oversized hood. Whoop. Next, you have a throat latch, somewhere around here, throat latch, there it is, throat latch. And last and definitely not least, you have the definitive duffel coat feature, which is these loop and toggle fasteners. The loops are typically made of rope or leather, and the toggle is typically made of wood or horn. You could not have any of the other aforementioned features, but have this design element right here, and the garment would still be considered a duffel coat, or if it was shorter, I guess a duffel jacket. You also have this second layer of fabric on the shoulders, often called a shoulder cape. Now, all of these features did serve a purpose when this coat was adopted for military service into the Royal Navy. Like many mainstays of modern fashion, this coat's use in a military setting is what really kind of launched it and codified it into mainstream fashion. But its story does not start with the Royal Navy. And it actually dates back to the Middle Ages. Starting back in the 1400s, the town of Duffel, Belgium, outside of Antwerp, first began producing a thick, tough, napped, warm woolen cloth that eventually became known as duffel cloth, and its use was widespread across Europe and presumably beyond. Now, who or when first used these style fasteners to secure this style cloth around one's body isn't entirely known. And just to be clear, this actually isn't technically duffel cloth, it's actually Melton cloth, but the two are very similar. Because this fastener design dates way back to ancient times. I mean, it's a very simple concept. So it's possible and presumable that not long after this cloth was first produced, someone fashioned a kind of just rough, crude overcoat that was closed with fasteners similar to these. But the generally accepted history of the duffel coat begins in the mid-19th century when British outerwear manufacturer John Partridge created a garment inspired by Polish military frock coats. It was made with a thick woolen fabric similar to traditional duffel cloth, though not necessarily made in Duffel, Belgium, and this design came to be known as the duffel coat, with an anglicized spelling of duffel. By the 1880s, the Royal Navy had adopted a modified version for military service, and for good reason. This woolen fabric is warm, durable, and water resistant, all necessary when working on a ship. The oversized fit allowed it to be layered over military uniforms and thick woolen knits. The large pockets could be used when wearing gloves or could hold other objects, large objects like binoculars. The oversized hood allowed sailors to cover their heads while also wearing a cap. The throat latch protected the neck from the elements, and the fasteners could be worked while wearing thick gloves, which is very handy. I also read that these fasteners are just easy to repair and replace. Unlike a buttonhole, which once a buttonhole's blown out, apparently it's hard to fix. Whereas a sailor with his basic little sewing kit can go around the ship, find some rope, find a piece of wood, and create something similar to this, and be back in business. And because this coat, with its humble, almost frumpy silhouette, was worn by all ranks, it became, incidentally, a kind of symbolic leveler of the generally steep and harsh military hierarchy. Though less a thing of today's military, in the past, the uniforms of captains and generals were often so much more visibly grand than that of the low-level sailor or soldier, thus bluntly highlighting the reality that if you're low in rank, you're much more dispensable and insignificant. But when everyone's wearing a duffel coat, this harsh reality is just less rubbed in your face. Now, come World War II, the duffel coat had been adopted by the British Army and became a favorite of its most famous wartime general, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. The stoic tactician who routed Rommel endowed the coat, typically issued in khaki, with a sense of British pride, solidifying it as part of the country's cultural heritage and giving it a new moniker, the Monty coat. And when the war ended, military surplus duffel coats began making their way into the civilian markets, most notably through the gloves and overall wholesaler H&F Morris. And their success prompted the birth of Gloverall, a company still around today, who manufactured a refined civilian version featuring lighter fabrics, linings, and just a scaled-down design. This overhaul quickly became a favorite of intellectuals and celebrities, and fit nicely into the burgeoning American Ivy prep style. Also in 1958, author Michael Bond gave his now iconic Paddington Bear a duffel coat, which really locked its distinctive look into the public's consciousness. And by the 1960s, the duffel coat had become mainstream and has since remained a classic menswear staple, appreciated for its rugged practicality and timeless look. Modern styling-wise, the duffel coat is considered appropriate to wear with jeans and sneakers, all the way up to just below formal wear. At least this seems to be the general consensus. You're free to do as you please. So as mentioned earlier, I don't have hardly any experience wearing a duffel coat. I've never owned a duffel coat, or should I say, had one in my closet, that is. But after working on this video, I've really come to appreciate what they stand for and the fact that they are designed to be worn over multiple layers. Now, I don't wear sports jackets all that often, though I do want to wear them more. But I do wear thick knits a lot, and a lot of them they don't work under a lot of my coats and jackets. They're too bunched up and it's not comfortable. Here, So this is my wool mohair sweater, super thick and roomy and warm, and I love it. But look at it, thing's huge. But for the duffel coat, no problem. Look at that. And this combination right here is very warm, like very warm. I could handle, I bet, 15, 20 degree weather in this getup, depending on wind chill. Like, all these layers create lots of space and dead air, which traps heat. Like, this is how you stay warm. Boom. But back to what I was talking about. I'm in the market for a duffel coat because though this one is an absolute beauty, I don't think it's for me. This thing is just too valuable to half-heartedly add to my closet, frankly. So, let's talk about buying them pre-owned. Now, before jumping into this, I'd like to briefly highlight my Substack, where I post high-value and/or interesting pieces I find on the pre-owned markets. I cover a wide variety of brands and styles, and the format makes it easy for you to cruise the collections, and links provide direct access if you'd like to take a closer look or possibly buy. And I just dropped a post on duffel coats. So after watching this, check it out to see what I think are some solid deals. Now back to the video. So one thing to be mindful of before shopping for a pre-owned duffel coat is different fabric styles. Now I'm not gonna get really technical here and talk about the difference between duffel cloth and Melton cloth or fabric weight or weave count or whatever have you, but instead just offer up two very broad, simple categories. Coarse and rugged and soft and plush. Because I saw both varieties on high quality coats and each have their pros and, depending on your preferences, cons. The coarser, more rugged fabric holds its shape, resists pilling, and can develop character over time, and overall just ages well, but it lacks the sensuous feel desired by some. I noticed this style seems to be more prevalent in vintage pieces. Whereas the lusher, softer fabrics with really raised naps have that cozy, sensuous feel, plus are more pliable and drape more naturally. But they also tend to show wear more quickly and can lose their crisp structure over time. It seems the market overall has shifted to more of this style fabric. Now, this isn't a strict binary, it's a spectrum. There are coats that fall somewhere in the middle, and I didn't pull this from some fashion authority. It's just my observation, and it might be an oversimplification. But after looking at basically every duffel coat on eBay, I think it's something worth paying attention to. So as demonstrated with my duffel coat, traditional duffel coats have a very roomy fit. But duffel coats made within the last 10 to 15 years have moved to a much more modern tailored silhouette. And the difference is pretty stark. It's almost like they're two completely different garments. So this is something you really want to pay attention to and consider, because both have their kind of pros and cons depending on how you look at it. The older duffel coats are great for layering, they're much more functional. Like, you can actually move around in them when wearing thick, heavy knits. Like you saw when I was wearing that really thick mohair sweater, I still had room for activities. Also, they're more steeped in tradition. If you look at old photos of people wearing duffel coats, they often fit like that one fit me. But with newer duffel coats, basically the opposite is true. Also, older duffel coats tend to have kind of shorter-ish arms. And I believe this design is a carryover from its use in the military, where they didn't want those long sleeves getting in the way of whatever they were doing. And they just depended on whatever was layered underneath the coat to protect their wrists from the elements. So just something to consider. So if you type duffel coat into eBay or Google Shopping or whatever have you, you will see a wide variety of producers. But here are the 5 brands that really seem to dominate the marketplace. First up, Gloverall. Again, considered the duffel coat brand and probably the most prolific on the pre-owned markets, and for most accounts, solid quality. Designs are rooted in tradition, and older models appear to use a pretty sturdy fabric, but the newer versions seem to have a more refined, of the times look. Overall, a solid, practical, high-value choice. $150 will go a long way. Next up, Burberry. Represents the refined side of duffel coats with soft, plush fabrics that look very chic and sensuous. They do sell for $2,000 to $3,000 new, depending on wool percentage, so be prepared to spend for one in excellent shape. And if you see one super cheap, be extra mindful of wear, because though durable, they're a luxury item, and luxury items often prioritize aesthetics and comfort over durability. Next up, Polo Ralph Lauren. So of all the traditional wool duffels from Polo Ralph Lauren I've handled, all have felt to be very high quality. A good amount, regardless of age, seem to use a coarser, more rugged fabric that I personally prefer and think is favorable when buying pre-owned given its durability. Even the newest one on their website seems to use a noticeably coarser fabric than that of its contemporaries. But there are exceptions. For a newer one, be prepared to spend, but a solid vintage piece can be had for under $200. Also consider some of Ralph Lauren's other lines like Double RL, Purple Label, or Rugby. Next up, Brooks Brothers. Solid all-around option, but do be mindful of quality variations. Duffels from their 346 and Red Fleece lines are not the same as their mainline pieces. The fabric in general appears to strike a nice balance between softness and structure. And lastly, Montgomery. Another iconic English duffel coat purveyor and probably the most budget-friendly of the bunch. Their classic duffels sell for $300 to $400 new, which makes me question their quality, and the material blend is 70-30 wool to synthetic, which isn't ideal. For this brand, I'd personally look towards their vintage offerings. And some other brands to consider, but not limited to, are LL Bean, J Press, Schott, Barber, Lands' End, and J. Crew. So relying solely on brand reputation to judge quality can definitely lead you astray. For one, quality from the same brand often varies over the years, and two, you might come across a piece you're kind of interested in, but it's from some obscure brand and there's little information out there on that obscure brand, so you kind of have to make the assessment yourself. So here's what to look out for. Always check the material tag and preference pieces with high or 100% wool content. Now, some synthetic fibers in the blend isn't necessarily a bad thing and does serve a real purpose, added structure and durability. But once you dip below 80-ish% wool, it seems this choice was likely a cost-saving measure and will affect longevity and function. For those using leather fasteners, pay attention to the leather used, as it's often an indicator of overall quality. Look for plush, supple leather that isn't super shiny or crispy. Look for famous fabric manufacturers like Moon or Harris Tweed. Some generally less regarded brands have at times used these highly regarded fabrics. Take note of manufacturing location, as pieces made in England, the United States, or Italy are often markers of at least decent quality. And lastly, try to intuit the overall execution of the piece. Does the fabric look consistent and even, with a subtle, diffused appearance, as opposed to shiny, often an indicator of plastics, and uneven? Are the seam lines crisp and straight, as opposed to wavy and kind of lumpy? Does the coat appear to have structure and integrity, as opposed to looking wrinkled and messy? This kind of assessment takes practice and is trickier when pieces are brand new, but over time, quality will just start to jump out at you. Now, the general consensus is that the overall quality of duffel coats has decreased over the years, as is the case with basically every other garment. So the highest value proposition will probably mean going vintage. So a lot of pre-owned duffel coats are going to have some imperfections and signs of wear, and that's okay. Remember that this garment is on the utilitarian side of classic dress wear and is meant to be worn hard. With that said, you should still be very thorough when assessing condition, because for one, it'll help you better assess value, which ensures you get a good deal. And two, the goal isn't to get a worn out coat. Like, you want to shoot for one in at least reasonably good shape, especially if you're wanting one with that soft plush fabric, because again, those don't age the best. So here's what to look out for. First, try to get an overall sense of wear. This often shows in the fabric's finish, with pilling or an uneven, slightly messy surface. Pay close attention to the cuffs, elbows, and collar, as this is where wear and thinning will show up first. Inspect the fasteners. Many a fastener has been frayed, chewed by a dog, or is just altogether missing. Now, replacing a fastener or fasteners is fairly straightforward, but matching the remaining ones might be tricky. Scan for holes, stains, moth bites, and shiny spots. And pay attention to how the piece lies. A heavily worn duffel will often lose its crisp structure. Now, this isn't always straightforward, as some coats have just been stored improperly, but is still worth keeping in mind. to wrap things up, here are just some random thoughts and opinions I have that you might find helpful. So if you're looking to buy a newer duffel coat, I would personally avoid the lower and mid-tier priced brands, with some exceptions. But I personally would not target one from, say, Land's End, Banana Republic, Uniqlo, even LL Bean. Like, they just looked pretty cheap. And with something as prominent as a duffel coat, its cheapness is just really glaring. Like, you can get away with wearing like a cheap button-up shirt. Like, it doesn't really matter. No one's gonna really notice, and it doesn't, the wearing experience isn't that different. But with a duffel coat, like, no. Like, plus they're gonna age terribly. So it might look all right now, but wear it for a couple of years and it's just gonna go psh. I personally would prioritize quality over condition. Like, a slightly worn out, high quality duffel coat looks better, in my opinion, than a brand new cheap one. All right, next. If you're worried about the bulky silhouette of duffel coats, consider one in a darker color, like navy blue. So, like, this thing's beautiful, but it is a lot, especially with the houndstooth pattern. And that's one of the reasons I'm not fully in love with it. Like, it's just a bit too much for my personality. I'd prefer one in navy blue. Next, consider a lining, especially like a satin lining, if you're going to be repeatedly putting a duffel coat on over nicer tailoring. Like, if every day you have to wear, say, a nice blazer to work or a nice sport jacket with really fine worsted fabric, repeatedly putting that on, putting like a coat with this type of coat without a lining on, it might hasten wear on that jacket because it's kind of coarse and it has a bit of a Velcro effect. Plus, the lining does make putting the coat on and off more pleasant, so something else to consider. And lastly, for the widest selection of duffel coats, be open to purchasing internationally. Specifically, if you're in the US or basically anywhere else besides Japan, be open to purchasing in Japan because there are a lot of high quality duffel coats from Japanese sellers. So, and I think that'll do it. Hope you've learned something about duffel coats and how to buy them pre-owned. And as always, thanks for tuning in to Coyote Sharp.